Yeah, he had written this maybe 30-page essay on the first 7 verses of the Quran. It's Al-Fatiha, the opening. Sab'ul Masani, 7 verses. And so we had a gathering. Before I left, I asked him if I could borrow the writing. Does you want to read what I wrote? Yeah, is that okay? No, it's not okay. I said, please, just, you can come to the car wash and pick it up tomorrow. He said, yeah, okay. He says, this is amanat. Amanat means, what do you call amanat? How do you say it? I don't know, it's like someone gives you something and you're supposed to like give it back the way you received it. And so I get home like around 3 in the morning after the gathering, and I read the stuff till about 5 or 6. I take a nap, go back to the car wash, and he's there at 10 with his wife. And there's a tiny little wrinkle at the bottom of one of the pages. He says, what the hell is this? I said, what? What'd they do? This is not the way I gave you the essay. I said, what happened? Everything's fine. There is a wrinkle. And then he kind of just taps me on the head, and then his wife, Shadia, looks at him and says, Hossein, leave him alone. It's fine. Next week, Thursday? So, is there anything you guys want to talk about before we go home? Yeah?
Can you speak on self-awareness?
You were supposed to email me on Tuesday night to come to the office on Wednesday, no? And then I was walking to someone to the office yesterday, and then I ran into you. And I said, oh, what are you doing here? He said, oh, I'm coming to your office. He said, well, you were supposed to email me. Yeah, I forgot. That's all you really need to know about awareness, that you forget. And there's a reason why you forget. I mean, all of us forget, really. What do you read in Daughter of Fire? How does she remember? I mean, he uses a lot of religious language. But he says it takes a while for his words, for the soul or for the teacher to make the soul pregnant. You know, sometimes something becomes a habit, and so it's very difficult to forget. So you just keep doing it because that's what you do. But before it becomes a habit, you have some interest, but oftentimes the interest has no pain in it. And so other things come in the way and you get distracted. And then you just forget. And then at a certain point, something triggers, whether it's a memory or a feeling or a piece of advertisement, whatever. And then you remember. And then you assume that just because you remember, you've once again become a student. But that's really not the case. Do you remember how often your parents would scream at you to do the alphabets or to do your homework?
Exactly.
Yeah, a lot, trust me. Because as a kid, you just want to play around. To be devoted to anything requires a good amount of sacrifice. But before you make sacrifice, you have to find it valuable. You have to be aware of it. You have to have a relationship with it. And when it's not there, you just forget. We talked about this, I think, on Tuesday. The basic needs, once they hit you, you can't forget them. You can't come to this class and focus if you haven't had dinner or breakfast. Your belly just screams, give me food. Who cares about ideas? The idea that man does not live by bread alone, as said by JC in the New Testament, it's stupid. It's only for those who actually have bread and are no longer hungry. For them, yeah, life is meaningless. And they're looking for something that they can't see, touch, or taste, or hear. If you live in a tent, your life is uncertain. I mean, imagine all these tariff stuff that's going on right now in the world of politics. No one desires to invest in anything. It's like a relationship. You have no idea where you stand. So that's the first thing. That there is a self that's just preoccupied with the basic needs of life. There is also the fact that you have a body. I mean, that body lives in society. Society has familial forces, parents. You have politics. You got to come to class and do work, for example. People harass you. You have to get a job, all those things. There is, whether you like it or not, there is a very strong set of components that is just religious-based. Our language, for the most part. I mean, consider the word something that's used in the world of psychedelics or drugs. Enthusiastic. It's a Latin word. It's usually those who are really good at using drugs the right way. The word enthos means to be filled with gold. That's just the way language is. Okay? So there are all these forces coming at you just because you have a body and that body lives in society. And so you have all sorts of deficiencies that society creates for you. Get a job, get education, find yourself a companion. So that's another self that's just worried about, how you're going to survive society. And the problem with living in society is that sometimes you have feelings and emotions you don't like. Maybe you don't like being here. Maybe you don't like school. Maybe you don't like your companion. Maybe you don't like where your life is. Maybe you don't like your past. Maybe you don't like all the ways you've made decisions. I mean, these are emotions that live inside you and they're very difficult to get over. Add to it the fact that you have this other part of you that's more psychological. They're like the root of who and what you are, whether it's traumatic or you have a belief system that you're a Christian or a Buddhist or a Muslim, or the element of pride gives you this false assumption that you know a few things about the few things in life, And so you got to kind of figure out what the hell to do with all those feelings and emotions that come your way, all the memories you have about your past. And, sometimes when you come upon issues that have to do with your just life in society, politics, and religion, and family, and friendships, your intellect comes down to figure things out. How do I resolve this conflict? How do I get an A in the class? And you realize most of your mental space is occupied with just fixing the issues around you. And then you have this tiny little part of you that says, once in a while, I want to do philosophy, the love of wisdom. And that has nothing to do with your physical body. It has nothing to do with the pathetic emotions that you've accumulated over the years. It has nothing to do with your ridiculous and infantile assumptions about who and what you are and your capacities. It's something just beyond you, And it's not usually accessible to us because we don't really have too much pain for that. It doesn't haunt us. We don't lose sleep over it. You certainly lose sleep when you have a bellyache or a toothache, or you just had a fight with your companion, or you realize that semester is finished and you have an F in the classroom, or there's a good chance that you may get laid off. I mean, Carmen is kind of anxious about tomorrow. What is UCLA going to say? A yes or a no? Am I going to go to San Diego? Yes or no? Is Stanford going to say yes or no? I mean, these are things that usually keep people up at night. But then you have someone like the Persian Daughter of Fire you're reading, or Carlos Castaneda, all these funny little people, very, very rare, who, in the course of being exposed to various life dilemmas, they say, you know what? I just don't want to be in a relationship anymore. I know how they are. I know what they are. It's not as interesting. You and I find various parts of life to be without any meaning. It's like you and I hanging out. I don't really have much depth to me, and you don't really either. So the shelf life of this relationship is about maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. After a while, one day you'll come home, you look at me and you say, I find no meaning in this relationship. It doesn't move me. Most of us find meaninglessness in tiny little branches in life. There are some people who look at the entire thing and they say, it's useless, it's meaningless. Anything that's not connected to this different part of me, I don't find it enjoyable. It's not valuable enough to pursue. So the question is where you place your physical body and what things are being advertised to it. If you look at Daughter of Fire, you realize her options are very limited. First, she's 50. She's been married a couple times. Maybe she's desperate for a kid that she never had. I don't really know. She also didn't have any issues about money. She also didn't have any issues about friendships. She had plenty of them. She just came to a crossroad where she looks at herself in the mirror and she realizes she's slowly getting old and ugly and smelly. That she has bought everything that money can buy. And she's had also friendships. And she's played around with kind of religious and philosophical ideas. But there comes a point where she says, you know what, I'm tired of reading, I want to be touched by something. Kind of like what Soren Kierkegaard used to say, that, I want an idea that I'm willing to sacrifice my life for. It's kind of like you go to Iraq or Afghanistan. At first you're frightened because your life is at risk. But then you realize you're making sacrifices you never imagined yourself being able to. And then, your duty is over, you come back to the States, and your wife says, your husband, let's go to Costco. You fight for a gallon of milk. Or you travel from one store to another to buy the cheapest eggs. You say, really? I'm reduced to shopping for eggs? So even though you love your family, you say, you know what, I'd rather go back to Afghanistan again. I come to life. The human relationships I find in the battlefield are very, very different than the sort of relationships that people have in the, everyday life. And she's come to this very, very mature place where she says, you know what, I'm looking for something. I don't know what it is, but I'm looking for something. And she has a feeling at first. First you have to get to a place where most of life just disappears for you. And we are not talking about and these days where everybody has trigger points from the age 2, your kid looks at my kid the wrong way. All right, let's sit and talk about it. In class you talked about A, B, C, D. Well, shit, by the time you get over all your crap that's inside you, you'll be 90. You have no time to attend to other parts of your life. So you have to understand that for a woman at the age of 50 or 60, or any person, to kind of get to a place where they begin to ask big questions, it means all these other tiny little things have disappeared. You know, that's one of the nice things about someone like me, for example, at the age of 18, being confused, being angry because I can't really figure out what the hell to do with life. I run into Hussein, you know, and the nice thing is, Hussein doesn't tell me, well, let's sit and talk about your issues. Hello. You know, what am I going to say? I'm confused. You're just a young fart. I'm supposed to be confused. That I don't like my parents? No. He says, you know what? I'm going to impose on you my issues, the things I think are interesting for me, not so much for you. And if you hang out with me, you will inherit the things that interest me. And sure enough, you know, having a girlfriend no longer interesting, going to school no longer interesting, making money no longer interesting, buying a car no longer interesting, partying with friends no longer interesting. None of those things are interesting because that's not where Hussein was. So as an 18-year-old, I began to like feel and think and desire things that like this 40-year-old man wanted. It ruins you, you know, but you realize that the pain that lives inside him, the quest that lives inside him, now lives inside you. But that's after like 5, 6 years of constantly hanging out with this man, you know. And when I think back, I realized that when he got to be 55 or so, he would, oftentimes at gatherings, he would look at us and say, I would never, ever, ever do now with any of you what I did when I was like 38. And I think there is a window that you're able to do certain things. Once that window shuts, it's going to be very, very difficult to find similar windows and then push them open, you know. And it's like a lot of different, you know, things. The most important being at the right place, right time, right people. So, I don't know what your sexual orientation is these days. I'm not even sure of my own self. But if you run into someone who wants to have a serious relationship with you, they have to spend a lot of time with you so that you can overcome your pathetic desires for things. They demand that you mature and grow up. Kendra. Yeah. Kendra, Santa Rosa, philosophy, humanities, religious studies. Make sure to apply full time. Don't forget. Oh, there's also Bakersfield. Just go to CCC registry. Yeah. Don't forget, the closing dates are approaching. Anyways, so anyone else? Carmen. Like what? I wasn't studying philosophy. I had dropped out of high school and I had dropped out of college. And we were getting money from back home. And I was going to Sacramento City College. But I would, at the beginning of every semester, and for, you know, immigrants, you had to, every class would cost you about $1,500. And this is like in the 1980s, you know. And you're a kid, you don't think about these things. So the beginning of the semester, I'd be inspired to take like 20 units. Then you would sit in the classes only to realize you're not really interested in English or philosophy or anything really. So you would just hang out with your friends in the cafeteria. And so I just dropped out. I did want to become a musician. But eventually I ran into this guy. And I remember one day just going to the closet and getting rid of all the music cassettes that I had because they were pop music. And then, I grew my hair long, had a long beard. So, the sort of things that are advertised to you, try to mimic them. So if you, for example, you read the New Testament, the four Gospels all the time, and for some strange reason you gravitate towards the sort of advertisements given to you in those four books, there's a good chance that you'll just have bread and potatoes every day. There's a good chance that you will not have very many friends. And most of the friends that you'll have, you'll desire to kind of just read the New Testament with. Eventually you become what's advertised to you. The only problem is when you become very, 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 very focused, you have this shield around you where all sorts of advertisement that hit you, they have no power to penetrate. They can't go inside you. They can't create desires inside you. And just in case, by chance, they do, and when you pursue the desires and when that desire is satisfied, you'll kind of walk away with a good amount of guilt, because that's not your self-image anymore. Because that's what it does. I mean, advertisement creates an image of yourself that's in the future. It's like if I keep saying chicken tikka masala, for example, if you like Indian food, if I say it enough times, there's a good chance that around noon, you'll find yourself at some Indian shop ordering chicken tikka masala, because you kind of have this picture in your head. Carmen is going to go home around 1 o'clock, turn on the TV, watch like a nice movie and have chicken tikka masala, mixed vegetables, garlic naan. And she's going to enjoy herself. That's what advertisements do. They give you an image of yourself that exists in the future. What you have in books such as Daughter of Fire, in philosophical and religious traditions, is that you have an image of yourself as a philosopher. You're not there yet. You just have an image, and you just have a tiny little desire that can anytime be devoured or demolished. This idea that you should live in the moment, it doesn't exist. You have tiny, 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 tiny little episodes where you're captured by the moment. It's like a blessing or a grace of sorts. Then it soon disappears. It's like a window. It just opens and then shuts very, very quickly. And then you're left with a memory, and that's it. But that doesn't really answer your question. It's okay.
I guess I have a question about hierarchy in relationships. It seems like you might believe that there needs to be one person that is sort of being exalted and the other one is kind of worshipping, for lack of a better term. I just wonder about relationships that don't have that element. And
What kind of relationships?
yeah, I think friendships, even like romantic relationships, I feel like it's not necessary or it could be detrimental for one of them to be worshipping the other. Maybe there's some sort of way for it to work where both people are getting something from each other. Not one person giving, one person receiving.
Why would you think that?
Why would I think that? Just from the way we talk sometimes about like the future.
Well, tell me what it means to be 60. Go ahead. There's a hierarchy right there. Tell me what it means to go through 20 years of schooling. There is another hierarchy. Tell me what it means to go through a triple bypass. There is another hierarchy. Tell me what it means to be in the classroom for 30 years. There is another inequality. We are unequal in temperament and experience, in insight, in all sorts of things. Someone has read You've read 2 books about Kierkegaard, someone has read 50 books. And it is true that you guys can sit at the dinner table and have a conversation, but the truth is that the other person knows more than you do. And they're going to fault you for all the inconsistencies that live inside you. Now, they can talk to you gently, softly, respectfully, or they can be crude. But the core issue remains that they know more than you do. Now, it is true that the element of pride, one of the 7 deadly sins, live inside you. It lives inside you. We don't like to be dominated. Now, that in itself could be caused by various things. First, I think all kids are very boastful and proud of who and what they are. Even a 2-year-old who doesn't know how to pick up the spoon and put food in his mouth. You try to tell him, can you please do it this way? And when you realize they can, you kind of grab their hand and they kind of just slap your hand away. Let me do it my way. I want to be autonomous. I want to be independent. That's what makes us us. We don't like to be subservient. We don't like to submit. We want our voices to be heard. Have you taken a carpentry class? Well, you should. And one of the things that sawing lumber, cutting lumber, and making walls and windows, one of the things that this does for you is the following. See, right now, we're only engaged in theoretical conversation. You think you know, I think I know. You try to dominate me, I try to dominate you. It won't end. You'll go eventually your way and I'll go my way, and our paths will never cross. But when you take a carpentry class, you realize this is not theoretical. They're actually going to give you a saw, and they're actually going to give you a tape measure, and they're actually going to give you lumber. And you have to measure how this window is going to be made. And when it comes to practical things, you know something really, really well. You've never done this before. You're not going to look at the teacher and say, I think this tape measure should be this way, or I should cut this other way, or the window should be this size. You're not going to say that because you can see it, you can touch it. When it comes to the realm of thought, all of us have certain deceptions about who and what we are. Now, it is true that you've seen your parents age. It is true that you have seen me being a little old. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of people in your environment limping along. And I'm sure you have some ideas as to what it means to be old. Your ideas are all theoretical. Nothing wrong with that. It's like, I don't know, you have a 5-year-old niece or a kid brother who comes and tells you all these like fantastic stories about what they want to do, what they want to be, and this and that. You're like a 30-year-old woman. You've come to realize the complexities of life. Sure, you're going to kind of humor your niece or nephew, but deep down you know that this kid is stupid, and eventually life is going to teach him or her some lessons. I mean, you're not going to be crude like that, but deep down you're going to laugh. Fantasies of a 5-year-old, fantasies of a 10-year-old. It's like, I don't know, it's like your 15-year-old friend coming to you saying, I'm so much in love with this man, and I just want to marry him. No, at your age, you know better. Well, marriage requires maturity, understanding. It requires money, to some extent being stable, figuring out a few things about life, And so you'll try to kind of encourage this person to live an examined life within the context of this romantic relationship. When you realize, well, she's in love or he's in love and they got concrete in their head, you kind of just walk away and say, whatever, knock yourself out. Just in case things don't work out, here's my number. Now, sometimes in life, things happen where you're forced to stand on your own feet, maybe from a very young age, and you have to problem solve on your own. Your dad is incompetent, your mom is incompetent, you don't really have very many people around. You cook for yourself, you do laundry. I mean, when I was sent to India at the age of 11, there was no one there. Eventually, and I didn't like the food. What am I going to do? Cry? So I went to the principal and I said, listen, and this is the 1970s, and Iran was like the France of the Middle East. And so I went to the principal and said, listen, is it okay if I go into the kitchen and cook food? He said, okay. He says, you don't like our food? It's just too spicy for myself and my brother, so let me just go if that's okay. He says, sure, go in there. And so we go to the kitchen. This is like a principal of this huge school. And so you begin to cook. Your mom isn't there, your dad isn't there, and eventually you gain this emotional independence. But what was lucky for us, someone like me, I don't know about my brother, but is that we didn't have certain words. It didn't exist in the lexicon. Like abandonment didn't exist. Love didn't exist. Trigger point didn't exist. None of those things existed. You get into a fight at school, you go home, your mom says, what happens? Why is it your face red? I got into a fight. She slaps you too. There is no suing anyone. There is no, two parents sitting and talking and resolving issues. Those things don't exist. Which means that there's a good amount of emotional freedom. You don't sit and think about these things. And so here the story is very different. When you gain independence with all these trigger points, well, it's very difficult to find yourself at a position where you're beginning to see that you're losing a lot of power to someone, anyone, whether it's a man or a woman, a teacher, a friend, who cares? You say, well, I don't want to give them who and what I am. I can't trust them. I don't trust them. I don't know who they are, what they want from me. And so you create all these narratives, and there is nothing wrong with that. We all do it. As long as you can figure things out on your own, more power to you. But the problem with life is it'll eventually pin you like a wrestler, and you realize that you can't move. Or when you play chess, you checkmated. And eventually you realize your own poverty. And then you can't stand up and say, you know what, I'm going to figure this out on my own. No, you've tried this plenty of times and you failed. Now, it may not click at the age of 18 or 25 or 30 or 40 or 50. Some people get it at the age of 60. So there's always going to be someone out there with a bit more experience. Always, And because of the element of pride, because of all the ridiculous shadows on the wall that you and I kind of assume about ourselves, you begin to wrestle. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. The thing about wrestling is, the Epic of Gilgamesh is interesting. Gilgamesh is a king. Gilgamesh has power. Gilgamesh is beautiful. In body. He's beautiful in emotions. He's beautiful in mind, but he's got some contaminations. He's got some corruptions. And the gods send someone into his life whose name is Enkidu. And in the Sumerian language, of course, Enkidu means the most innocent of humankind. That someone really has no evil intentions. The only thing they want to do is remind you what it means to be human, to make you more aware. But what you have in the Epic of Gilgamesh, probably a story that's about 10, 15, 20,000 years old, is that Enkidu knows that talk is cheap. It's something that Gurdjieff also believed in. All good teachers know that talk doesn't get you anywhere. Words are empty at the end of the day. So they begin to wrestle. Now, what happens is Enkidu knows who he is and what he is. Gilgamesh assumes to know who and what he is. And there's a good amount of, when they encounter each other, jealousy happens, anger happens, envy happens. And They begin to wrestle for 6 days and 6 nights. In the act of wrestling, and I don't know if you've ever wrestled with anyone, if you want to look at wrestling like there's a guy you like as well as hate. You don't want to be in a relationship with him, but you also do. So there is this love-hate that lives inside you. Eventually, you find yourself in some room with this person, and you guys are having sex. Okay. You're wrestling intellectually because you say, "What are you doing? Get out." You're wrestling emotionally. "I hate him. I love him. I hate him. I love him." And of course, your bodies are grinding with one another. You know. And there is the future you saying, "You're going to hate this." There's the future of you that's saying, "This may actually work out." There is the past you that says, "You've been here before, don't do it." You know. So there are all these things that are happening while you're wrestling with someone. Wrestling is an expression of intimacy that is conflicting, that has all sorts of ups and downs emotions, negatives and positives. But something about you softens. Despite the fact that you may hate, you stay. And there comes a point where you, as a king, look at the stranger who is a nobody, and you say to him, "Can I get you a cup of coffee? Should I make food for you? Can I massage your back?" And this Enkidu says, "I'm a nobody. You are a somebody. Why would you want to do all that stuff for me?" That wrestling led into Gilgamesh falling in love with Enkidu. But it's only through wrestling, not sitting and having a conversation. It doesn't work. And so in the act of wrestling, you'll figure out a couple of things. You either have power or you don't have power. And you don't even know if the power that you have or the power you don't have, you have realized in earnest. It may be a trick played by you on your own self. These are things that only time will tell. But yes, there's power in every aspect of life. How can you be equal to anyone? You're a mystery to yourself. The confusion that you have in all different stages of life and your growth, they're never going to go away. You will never be able to share them with anyone. Not through language, not through poetry, not through music. The only person who can understand dimly is you. And that's in complete isolation and aloneness. And you will find, every time you open your mouth to express how miserable you are on the inside, the other person will say, "Yes, I understand. Let me read you a quote. Let me read you a poem." What is that going to do for you? To be pacified for a minute and then going back into isolation. I'm not talking about not finding comfort in the arms of another, whether it's poetry or whatever. But at the end of the day, all human beings are alone. And you got to figure that out on your own. Now, some people need to go on that journey, and we all have to. You either have a toolbox, when you open it up, there are actually tools. And some people assume to have tools, they open the toolbox and nothing works. And time will tell. Despite all of my ranting about old age, about being ready for death and this and that, I don't know if I am. I write about it, I think about it, I listen about it, but I have no idea how I'm going to be while I may lay in my, ultimately deathbed, unable to move, just my eyes open. So. Emptiness? No. After class, you're going to drive to your class. Imagine while driving, someone just rams into you. That's a shock. It empties you. Your name is no longer Kendra. There are no classes to teach. You don't have any degrees. You're in a complete state of shock. That's empty. The problem with that particular kind of emptiness, where you kind of scream, you become an existentialist in the sense that you realize that at any time life could be taken away from you. And you had planned to talk about Plato in your class, but you say, fuck Plato. I want to talk about the absurdities of life, the injustice of life, that at any time your plans could go out the window. I want to have an hour and 15 minutes with a great amount of passion, and I'm angry. That's what emptiness does. Because there is nothing that you can hold on to except this raw passion. It's uncooked, it's unrefined, it's raw, and it's filled with intensity, and it's beautiful. The only problem is, it's raw, it's uneducated, it has no understanding in it. It's like all of a sudden someone comes and just rips every piece of fabric out of your body. You have nothing, you're just naked. Then there is another kind of emptiness where someone, again with a good amount of wrestling, you come to realize that most of the things you know about yourself, you think about yourself, you feel about yourself, most of your ambitions and pursuits, they're good to have, they're just for the most part useless. You need them to survive life. You should keep them from 9 to 5. But when you come to my office, don't talk about them. I don't really give a shit about them. Okay. And so knowing that how attached you are to all the things you do from 9 to 5, you and I will sit, for example, and we go through these, I suppose, value judgments. Or maybe I'm cunning enough, clever enough, inspiring enough to overwhelm all the desires that live inside you. That when you come, for example, to the house or the office, all you're able to think about are the things we talk about. But you're there for only maybe half hour, maybe 2 hours, maybe 4 hours. The moment you get back in the car, your life comes back to you. If you and I engage in this relationship for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, little by little we realize, very much like the way I realized, that I no longer want to work at the car wash. I don't want to work at Caltrans. I don't want to work for the state. I'd rather just be homeless but read books. I don't even want to go to school, and I don't care about the essays. I'd rather plagiarize and copy and paste as opposed to sitting and racking my brain to write an essay that I don't find interesting. Little by little, I begin to understand the hollowness of my life. And when you realize that things about your life don't really capture you, they become meaningless. In meaninglessness, you can't have relationships with anything out there. And that's one of the things you need to understand about men. Women are different than men are. When men kind of find their life a little empty, they get into relationships. They just can't be serious about them. If I was to be very, very, very honest with you, it wouldn't be very difficult for me to walk away from my family. My wife, on the other hand, she probably wouldn't be able to. I have no problem not seeing my kids, or my wife, or my parents, or anybody. And that's because I was hollowed out for many, 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 many years. Okay. Now, when you get hollowed out, what happens is your ability to form attachments and get consumed by them. It doesn't mean it won't happen, it does. but you can easily recover just in case things don't work out. And so what will happen is very much like what you will find in Buddhism, that you will walk into relationships. It's a birth of a new Kendra. At the same time, because you understand, because this relationship has led to understanding, not so much you becoming an emotional junkie, is that with every birth, you see also its coffin sitting right next to it. You also know that any time it could turn upside down and you're forced to walk away. And in as much as there may create a good amount of pain and hurt about you, you'll be okay. If I was to be your husband, and let's say you and I have a great relationship, and suddenly comes this news to you that Amir just had a stroke and died, you become empty. You'll cancel your class, you'll probably come home, you'll find my cold white body, and you'll weep. You don't care if anyone can hear you, see you. The elements of shame and guilt just go away. The social construct has no power over you anymore. That's emptiness. But it doesn't last very long. One of the, again, nice things about the Epic of Gilgamesh is that when Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh says, why should I go back to Uruk? The city has nothing to offer me. There is nothing in the city that can replace Enkidu. Enkidu has transformed me. I'm a king, but I feel like Saint Francis of Assisi. I've become a beggar. I don't know what I'm looking for. I just know that city doesn't have any answers. And it's not just Oakland itself. All the shops, all the people, all the ideas, all the bookstores, nothing in the city can satisfy you. And that's a horrifying place to be. But that particular hollowness or emptiness has been given to him gradually, little by little. And it was given to him by Enkidu through this medium called love. The thing with this particular love is that Enkidu is the product of nature. He's innocent. He lives in the forest. Things are very natural about him. He doesn't say things because he's read them in books. He doesn't say them because they're like bumper stickers. There are things he understands. And that impacts Gilgamesh. And he knows that he can't find people like that in the city. But he does know that there is some guy that lives somewhere out there. King Uttanapishtim, So that's, And even by the time he gets to this particular fellow, King Uttanapishtim, Gilgamesh is full of himself. And Uttanapishtim has to test him, wrestle with him. And Gilgamesh comes to realize he's still a stupid man, despite the way he loved, who he loved, what he went through. He's still quite stupid. But there is this part in King Uttanapishtim that says, you know what? Even though you're stupid, I'm going to tell you a piece of, I'm going to give you this information. And if you're a good student, you listen and you'll try to kind of apply. And he does. And he goes back to the city, tries to talk to people about his experience, only to realize that people don't really care. Despite pretending that they're interested, they don't really care. And so he writes his stories on a wall. And I think up to date, we have about maybe 25 tablets that have to do with the story of Gilgamesh. I mean, that's another interesting factor. Why would a man, after all these rich experiences, would desire to write his experiences on a wall, on a book, and not on the hearts or minds of people? Emptiness. Anyways, so there you have it. First, I think you're insufficient in life, so you gravitate towards people. That's one way you express your emptiness. You try to have other people fill in the spaces that are empty, blank. Whether it's a relationship or school or whatever. Then you may come to this place where we call, you get a call. In other words, you look yourself in the mirror like, what was her name? Elizabeth Taylor. You realize you were once pretty. You get out of this bathtub, you look yourself in the mirror, and the mirror reflects back to you that you've gained a lot of weight, you have wrinkles, you just look bad. And so you say, you know what, that's a call. I need to kind of make some changes to my life. Now, for Taylor, this was a change to her physical life. It may come upon you that your physical life is fine, but your calling is one of spiritual or intellectual quality, that you want to make changes to your spiritual life. In other words, you want your spirit to come to life. You want to be occupied by your spiritual desires as opposed to your physical desires. What you'll do is you'll try to find a teacher, and then instead of begging other people to be filled, now if you're lucky enough to find one, you'll beg a teacher to fill you in. If you have a good teacher, after many years of emptying you and filling you, emptying you, filling you, making you very independent, autonomous in a very healthy way, and it doesn't mean that you live in the desert. It means that you live in the city, that you have relationships with people, you make a lot of money, you have a house, you do all sorts of things, but you are independent. That even if those things were to be taken away from you, you'll still be whole. Okay? Then there comes a point where you realize you no longer need a teacher. You can do things on your own. You have the proper tools. What happens, there are going to be moments of emptiness. Whether you're a teacher or a good student, it doesn't really matter. But you no longer beg humanity, you no longer beg teachers, you no longer beg beg books. What you do is that there's a part of you that, forgive this kind of language, that you bow before life. You bow before gold, you bow before love, you bow before wisdom. And in a very silent way, you ask those particular components to come to your aid. If they come, fine. If they don't, that's fine. Sometimes, despite your emptiness being very intense and troubling, you still have the ability to make poetry with that. عشق در دریای غم غمناک نیست. That despite emptiness creating a good amount of sorrow inside you, you're able to be profoundly creative in sorrow. I mean, this is a very, very advanced stage, So that's the best I can do. You should read the 84 chapters of Tao Te Ching. Translation by K.O. Schmidt, German. Only 500 copies were printed. Really good translation, great commentary. You can buy it on Amazon, $25. It's worth it. I'm sorry. Curious. Yes.
How you handle it in the experience?
Sorry. You got to start from the beginning. Yes.
It makes me curious how people value translating human experience into different forms, like verbally.
How people translate
Their
experiences through language?
Verbal or like the or verbally or art or poetry.
How do they express, translate?
How do you find your Or and
I don't know why you're asking the question, but you're asking it nevertheless. There is a part of you that desires to ask something or is moved by something, and you're expressing, I suppose, the passion that lives inside you the best possible way you can. As I suppose you go through life, read a bit more books, wrestle with yourself intellectually, emotionally as to how to best express yourself, then it comes out and it acts like a mirror, and you say, no, that's not the best reflection of what lives inside me. So you revise it and you do it again, over and over and over again. Then there comes, I mean, in the process of trying to kind of edit yourself, you will get to a point where you will no longer ask questions, at least outwardly. Maybe you'll just express yourself through poetry or dance or music or whatever, but you have less need to be heard. I think as you move through different stages of life, your questions begin to change. And so because it is new, you will not have the ability to express yourself the way you did before. Look, when you're 15 or 16 or 17, it's very easy to look at someone and say, I love you. It takes 2 weeks. And it's very unrefined. It's very uneducated, but it has a lot of intense emotions in it. When you get to be 25 or 30, you have been through a few things. You know, there's a good amount of doubt inside you, fear inside you, expectations and hopes and dreams inside you. You're able to see the other person. You're able to see yourself much better now. And so your ability to say, I love you, becomes less, unless you haven't learned anything from life. Okay? And so you begin to inject more stuff into this thing called love. You inject money, you inject education, you inject parents, you inject stability of sorts. You know, and these are things that didn't exist when you were 15 or 16. I can't claim to understand your question, but I will say this and then we'll end it. If you had asked me, Amir, what do you think about retiring from teaching 30 years ago, I would laugh at the question. 20 years ago, I would laugh at the question. 10 years ago, I would laugh at the question. It's no longer a laughing matter. I actually think about it every single day. And so when you ask me, what are you going to do when you retire? I don't have an answer for it. It's a new thing for me. I'm at a different stage in life. You know, I don't really know how my addiction to the classroom, once it goes away, what exactly am I going to replace it with? Am I going to miss it? If so, how much? You know, right now it's just intellectually. You know, I think about it once in a while, but, you know, those things don't mean much. On a practical level, I have no idea. Maybe I'll do what Hussein always did, or at least used to say in a humorous way. You know, you retire, you get bored, you look at your wife and you pick a fight. That keeps you occupied for the next like 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks. I mean, ask Abby, she'll tell you. Just kidding.
Theory of evolution.
I know I have grown to respect my body in ways I never could, I never did. That's a good amount of maturity. Have I evolved? Yeah. My relationship with money at the ages of 15, 20, 25, 30 Very different now than they were. Have I grown? Absolutely. My office door used to be open because I treated my time and my energy casually, because I understood things the wrong way. Now, I have grown. Does that make me a Scrooge? Yeah. Does it make me a bit mean? Absolutely. Do I care? No. If you're talking on like a massive level, I don't really know. I think we're all consumers. That's how we live. You know, some people are mass consumers. Some people consume selectively. You know, you can change the masses, but you can change a few people once in a while. So drastic change for the public doesn't exist. For a couple of people, maybe. But the opposite of evolution is also devolution, which is that sometimes instead of you having learned from some experiences, those learnings are a bit too painful. So you go back. Yeah.
Why do people on the far side of the political spectrum seem like they're so alike?
Say again?
Why do people at the opposite side of the political spectrum seem like they have more in common?
I don't know. Professional politicians are very different than you and I talking about politics. We have no power. We're being used and exploited on a daily basis. You know, I don't like grading students. I don't like assigning work. You know, and I can come to class and talk about this stuff, but at the end of the day, if you're talking about professional politicians, it's very complex because you have lobbying involved, you have re-election, you have fears of all sorts that you and I don't really have as commoners. You know. And politicians desire to be liked by a large group of people because they need to be re-elected. They need money. They need funding. So it really depends on what sort of politicians you're talking about. It's always funny for me to sit back and kind of watch CNN, the roundtable that they have. You know, they have like 2 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and like dogs, they go at it. You know, and nobody really listens to anything that anybody says, and it's a waste of time, really. You know, it's fun to watch, to kind of just sit back and realize how ridiculous human beings really are. I don't know. Anyone else? Yeah.
Feels authority important.
Let's say you have a desire to drop out of school. Okay? There are going to be 2 different groups in your life. Now, the premise you're working with is, I don't like school, I want to drop out, and I want to go to Yosemite. Or capitalism sucks, whatever, however you want to phrase it. You have 2 different groups, and each group has an authority figure. One is going to encourage you, one is going to discourage you. The way we usually function, because we like to conform and we like to be confirmed, there's a good chance that you're going to gravitate towards the group that says, yeah, school really sucks. Capitalism is really awful. Money is the root of all evil. Go to Yosemite. Then there is another authority that says, what are you, stupid? Stay in school. School sucks. Capitalism sucks. But you're not going to remain 20 forever, you know. One of these days you're going to find a companion. Now, is it true that some people can live off the grid? Absolutely. Could you do that? Maybe. You know, is it true that out of 100 people who play football at colleges, you could be drafted to like 49ers? Yeah. The likelihood, 0.000%. Should you have a backup plan? Absolutely. You know. Now, it's really difficult to figure out who the authority figure is and whether or not you should trust them. Okay? Usually we work through feelings when it comes to relationships. First you feel someone, then you move towards them. Time passes, your intellect comes in and says, okay, I made the right or the wrong decision. It happens in all of our romantic, especially relationships. You go to a party, there is someone who keeps winking at you, you gravitate towards them because they got good lips, a nice nose, a nice this, nice that, and you guys have sex, it's a great relationship for 6 months, then it goes away. And then you need therapy for 20 years. Now experience becomes your best authority. It's something that Krishnamurti would often say. Why the hell would you want to listen to Amir Sabzavari? Why would you want to read a book? Any book. Just sit the fuck down. Close your eyes. Go through all the things you've gone through. Okay? That's the best authority. That's the best book you can read. But reading by itself is not enough. You have to read being open. Being able to receive the fact that you are deficient and incompetent and a loser. And in some cases, winners. Okay? And you have to be able to handle all the awful emotions that come about. And that's too much. But besides that, you have to be able to process the experiences. You know? And then you have to be able to understand them. And then you have to be able to apply what you understand. I mean, these are stages you have to go through. But because we don't really know how to think and how to process our feelings and experiences well, you need an authority figure. You need books. You need to read a lot of books. You need to take a lot of classes. If you're lucky, you need to read, like, I don't know, find a teacher out there who can show you how to feel and think about the right things. Yeah. You know, you may find an authority figure that you may resist, who talks to you about being young, being stupid, value of time, value of just being youthful and vigorous. You know, you may say, I just want to go out and have a good time with life. And says, you know, why the hell would you want to do that? Just focus, you know, for 5 years on school, get your master's or PhD, then go out and do whatever the fuck you want to do. You know, the problem with good authority figures is that they demand too much. Are they necessary? Absolutely. Replace the word authority with someone who has experience. Take a class in biology. Take any science class. Well, because it has practical application in the class, you just know there are things you've never seen, you've never done, you just don't know. So you submit. In the world of ideas, the story is very, very different. There needs to be a great amount of wrestling until you just either walk away saying the guy is a jerk, or you submit with a good amount of doubt for a long, long time until you submit in a different way. But the best book you can ever read, book of your own experiences, but you need to have the proper eyes. You know, like when you go to Pete's and you say, I want a pound of coffee, and the first thing they say is, for what? Drip? Or something else, you know? And so they give you a special kind of a blend for, or a grind, or a, what is it called? Thing for a different sort of a thing. Abias. What? Skyler? Any other questions or comments before we... What time is it? Yeah, Abhi. Abhi?
You mentioned other languages.
I went to Hussein's house for about 10 years, and we were friends afterwards. And I became so bold that whenever he picked up the microphone to sing, I would take it away from him and I would sing because he had a bad voice. And he didn't really know how to sing. I surrendered my life to him physically. I would go there, but I would fantasize. I would doubt. And though physically I would go there 3-4 times a week, and he would come to the car wash 2-3 times a week, physically I would have the proper etiquette. I would be very aware of my physical body language, the way I looked at him, the way I spoke, the tone of my voice. But I wasn't emotionally or intellectually able to submit. I was too young, was too immature, maybe I don't know. At a certain point, I realized that I am profoundly emotionally attracted to him. So I would absorb a lot of information. I wouldn't be able to think about them because I wouldn't know how, but I would feel them. And that's how it goes. First, you submit with your body. And even that is difficult. Because as a kid, you have all these other things you want to do. But Hussein says, come to the house. So you have to sacrifice all those desires and physically take your sorry ass to his house and sit there. Okay. Now sometimes he wouldn't say much, or the things he said did not interest me. And so I would begin to say, what am I doing here? Okay. So it took a long time for my body to have this habit. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays, we go to his house. And that was a routine for my body. After a while, emotionally, I submitted. In other words, for whatever the reasons were, I became emotionally connected and attached to him. And then whatever he said, it just went inside. There came a point where I demanded to understand from him and from myself. And then I had to get rid of my own assumptions. And then allow him to become my dictionary. He would define words for me. He would translate things for me. Then I would copy and paste his ideas into myself. Okay. Then there came a point where I submitted to my own independence. I said, I no longer want to be around him. I no longer need him. I can kind of have enough focus to lock myself in a room for hours and just write. Have the intensity of emotions, have the reflective abilities to process things, and then write. And then I had to submit to the fact that my expressions are raw and unrefined, and have the humility to go back and keep at it over and over and over and over again. You know, it reminds me of this book that was I think it's Franz Kafka, if I'm not mistaken. It's about the guy who writes this, he wants to write a book. And it starts by, there once was a man. And then he goes, what if it was a woman? He says, there once was a man and a woman. What if there were no men or women? And you realize for the rest of his life, he's just working at this first line and the book never gets finished. Because he sees so many complexities in the first line. You know. But, yeah. It's not difficult to take yourself somewhere physically. It's not even difficult to become emotionally aroused. It's not even difficult to have intellectual excitement. But to be disciplined and to be devoted, to make those things into habits, that's tough. Well, another waste of a day. Any one else before we go home? Carmen? No one? Have a nice weekend.